Hello, boys and girls. David Vose here. Boy, it is a dreary day here. We got snow, and we've had several snowfalls in the last few days. It just snowed all night. It snowed last evening and then all night, but it's not that cold. So it doesn't really stay very long. It's just kind of melting as it piles up. We've got a couple of inches, very wet snow. But tomorrow is going to turn off warm, and then we're going to get 67 degrees here pretty quick. Day after that or something. But I hope you're having a wonderful day. Guys, I've got the most fascinating thing to tell you today. The most fascinating subject that you will ever hear in your life for very many reasons. One, it's just fascinating by itself. It's fascinating, not only on the surface, but when you get into it and understand what it's for, what you can do with it. I'm going to tell you things today that you've never heard. It'll blow your mind. Not a soul on this earth understands this. I even looked it up in AI, and they didn't understand. They didn't know what I was talking about. They don't know this. Nobody, if AI had no clue what I was talking about, then it's because there is no information out there that they could draw from. So feel free to think that everything I'm about to tell you is complete garbage and I'm an idiot. But if you listen, you'll see that's not true. What I'm about to tell you is the truth. And if it is the truth, and you were wise, you will listen carefully and learn everything I'm saying today. Because you will be able to use this. Not only in understanding your life, how far you've come, how far you've got to go, what you need to do, as well as you could interpret other people's life courses and help them to understand what they need to do and where they're at and what they got to do. Now, I want to talk about Tarot. A simple deck of cards. Now, a playing deck of cards, a deck of playing cards, you've all played with them. You've all used them. You've seen them. They do magic tricks with them, right? But only because, not because there's something magical about a deck of cards. Because, well, there is something magical about a deck of cards. This is what we're going to learn today. But not because anyone knows there is or understands what a deck of cards is. The knowledge of what the deck of cards is been lost from humankind. Yes, you see people playing with tarot. And then, of course, Christians are like, oh, it's evil. You Satanists, I guarantee it has nothing to do with Satanism. In fact, the tarot cards is directly related to the tree of life or the Kaballah. Now, modern Kaballah is just there is no Kaballah. You know what I mean? Like, Kaballah is a system, but what is it? Where can you go and show me what is a Kaballah? I mean, there are books that are in line with those ways of thinking, the sephiroth concepts like the tree of life and all of this. But where is there a book called the Kaballah that we can read? No. And yes, but no one knows what the book is that will teach you the Kaballah in the shortest amount of time. I mean, the true Kaballah. There's no way to mess with it. All the traditions you heard was how it has been filtrated by the evil people. Because you see, Jesus, Mary Magdalene brought this wisdom with them. The priesthood, the true Melchizedek priesthood. When the Vikings came in, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the Hurlus and the Vandals and the Lombards took over Italy and all of this area in France. They infiltrated the kingdom of the Languedoc and named it out of tradition, the Septimania, which was the 7 cities of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, that they ended up infiltrating the Knights of St. John and making modern Templars and building the kingdom of Satan that you have today, headquartered in London with that great temple called the church, their church that rules over you, which is why when you go to court, you got some guy with a black robe and he's got some authority over you. He actually doesn't, but because you signed your birth certificate, your driver's license, and everything else, everything is based on this we will do. It's a covenant that all men have accepted, even after Jesus Christ came and freed us from it. It's the Old Testament covenant of law, and they can, of vengeance, and they can kill you, but you have to sign it. Even Israel could not be punished by Yahweh had they not signed it. When they got circumcised, when they agreed and said at Sinai, this we will do. But Jesus gave another covenant of love. And just like Jesus and his disciples understood the Torah as instructions to enter into the spiritual kingdom, in other words, a map, they understood the temple not to be something that we make with a chisel and a hammer, a house for deity to inhabit. The divine being cannot inhabit a house made with human hands. But remember, in the Torah, you are not to build a temple with hewn stone, with a chisel and hammer. So every temple, including Solomon's, was defiled from the beginning and could not be a temple of the Lord, because they were all used in some flamboyant way which glorified a bearded man and some priesthood, which was not what the original temple was. It was not made with hands. It's the universe. And so everything in the Torah is based on this. And the true teachings came down through Jesus and John the first night there in France. And they would have shared it with anyone. It was not hidden from anyone. They didn't walk right up to somebody and start explaining all this, because you'll see how deep this is and how hard it is to understand. Although they had language then that more corresponded to the original language, so they would have understood a lot of this anyway. We today have been, the Tower of Babel, the scattering of the tongues, which is the scattering not of just one language, but of this whole system of the tarot that we're going to talk about. It's the scattering of the knowledge, the instructions of the Lord, the Torah, which is the tarot, which is the instructions that, the Judeans had, and then they got down and worshipped it. That's the idolatry. What Christ did was that they saw the word or the Torah written in the sky, and the stars are like a clock. They finally predict certain events, because certain events were given authority to occur at certain appointed times, the Bible says. And those times were appointed from the beginning. Therefore, they can be mapped. And you can see on the clock, and there's an alarm bell that goes off. Every clock has 12 houses, just like the 12 astrological houses. 12 months in a year, 12 hours in a day. It is an intricate system that is not just to tell what time it is, although that's very important, to know what time it is during the day, or what season it is, or what month it is, or what day it is in the year. But it's also to tell you what time it is in your life. It is not some hokey-pokey demonic thing. It is a clock, a destiny, your destiny. And you must hear the alarm going off. One of these days, I'll tell you a story about how the Lord gave me a clock to help me understand all of this. And it was an alarm clock, and it was going off on my birthday when I was 42 years old, but I want to separate that, tell you about that some other time. But there's so much that people don't understand about the tarot deck. So it came from the tradition of Jesus and the disciples, the Sanhedrin that Jesus 12, the 72. Now, the tarot decks have 78 cards. There are 22 major arcana and 56 minor arcana. What does that mean? We don't know what these words mean. Well, remember we got in Gnosticism, we have the archons. There you go. You see, arcana, archons. These are the chief players. Now, why 78 and why 22? Well, 22, if you remember, is the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And as we've said on this channel in the past, the 22 letters is a graduating system around the clock because we go around astrological ages. There's an appointed time for each house and each ruler, which is ruling over you. And whenever you were born in the world, that's what you start. And you go from there. If you were born in a certain place, then you already have attainment to that. And you start, and from that point, you being the fool, in our deck of cards, he's called the Joker. They used to call him the Fool. And when the Fool turns up in hearts, you're going to get love, or in diamonds, you're going to get fortune, or something like this. Well, that's the child way of understanding it. You know, today there's a lot of people that want to get into astrology and they want to be astrologists. Guess what? You cannot be a true astrologist without this knowledge I'm about to tell you today. And it's not being taught anywhere. Nobody has any clue what astrology is about, or tarot reading. Tarot reading is not just throwing down cards and getting impressions and saying, oh, we just got a priestess card, therefore, no. Just like I said, if the Fool comes up on a red heart, doesn't mean you're going to get married to the queen. But for someone who is spiritually attuned, in other words, they can communicate telepathically with spirit, they might be able to interpret your future in some very uncanny ways that could come true, but might not have anything to do with the deck of cards. I mean, you can use a deck of cards or a goat's liver or the stars or the rings on a tree or the swirls in your little glass sphere. But all you're doing is getting your spiritual mind activated to see with your third eye. And if you're accustomed to doing that, if you're practiced at that, you can get success. I don't know of too many people that are in complete tune or in tune completely with the spirit and can do this accurately. But you must have this gift to be a very accurate prophet. You must have the Holy Spirit, I should say. Like the Apostle Paul says, we see in a crystal, a dark crystal, or a crystal darkly. In other words, we're looking into a crystal or a mirror. That word could be translated mirror. A dark crystal could be a mirror. But we're looking into it and it's giving a reflection. But then we will be face to face. So early Christians had crystals that they looked into. Levitical priesthood had the Urim and Thummim. They had the breastplate on an ephod with 12 stones. The 12 stones were each of different quality and were symbolic then of each of the 12 houses. And so what the Levitical priests were doing is astrology. So you Christians who don't want to believe in astrology, well, and then you're all like, oh, we've got to be circumcised and keep all the laws and keep the Sabbath. Well, then you're following astrology. The only problem is that the Levitical priesthood did not know what astrology is or what their system is. They're interpreting the Torah, the tarot, incorrectly. They don't understand it. They've become hard taskmasters, brute, ignorant beasts that don't understand anything about this ancient wisdom. All priesthoods are the same, But Judaism has fallen. Now, pretty much all the ancient temples fell. Most of them aren't even in operation. Christianity took over, apostatized back to Judaism, and destroyed all the other temples. So they're all in apostasy. The original temples might not have been teaching falsehood. No temple ever did. Torah's not falsehood. But they began to idolatrize it. So Christianity had the original teachings that was taught in all the temples, including Judaism and all the other temples. They were the pagans. Christianity, the Gentiles received the gospel. And Paul went on the road to Damascus and to Ephesus and Colossia and Rome. They spoke in tongues, as did the Essenes that were at the temple of Artemis. The temple of Artemis is the worship of Artemis, the huntress, who is also the Virgo, the virgin, who is the house of bread, Bethlehem, which means the processed food, or what was originally meant meat. Just as Artos today is understood to mean bread, but it is from the word Artemis, which means the huntress, who brought in meat. And it means the food that we live on to die. By the sweat of your face, you eat lacham, Beth lacham. This bread or this food or this meat, you'll die by killing. So our Virgin Mother is Artemis. And the Essenes were there, and the holy virgins, and this is why Jesus had the train of virgins. It all started, of course, with the temple there at Heliopolis. But all these ancient churches and temples were the true. Christianity carried the baton, and the flamens there in Rome, or the priests, were those who had the twin flame that received the Holy Spirit, the 120 there on Pentecost. They became the ruling class. Jesus was accepted as the Messiah. They apostatized. Everything was being run from Heliopolis, and there at Alexandria, where they had the great library, and all the priests were from there, including the Rex Sacrorum, the Rex King of the Sacrorum, or the Sacred Sacrament, which is the high priest of Rome, which is the same as the Melchizedek priesthood. Judaism, the Goths, the tribe of Dan with Judah that went up there and mixed with Poseidon, Japheth, which is Posai, or Iapos, or Iepa, as in Japheth. Etymologically, those are the same words, and Dan at the end. They became the 10 tribes that were lost, but on the dark side. They accepted the lower carnal commandments and genocide and hate and war. And they took over the church and apostatized back to that deity of vengeance, not understanding that Torah, and therefore when these spiritual children of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene in Languedoc and France were not allowed to study Torah spiritually and understand it, they made the Tarot deck so they could still have the Torah. It's the same thing. And it was a guide to the stars, which is where the gospel is written, as it says in the book of Psalms, repeated again by the Apostle Paul. The gospel was sent forth. Their word went into all the earth from the heavens. The glory of deity is revealed from the heavens by the astrological story in the sky. And anyone who comes up today wouldn't be able to find the truth. And they look back at these ancient temples and they don't know, what is it, fertility rites and worshiping women and pantheons and all that. No, they have no clue as to what any of this is about. It's about what you see in the tarot deck. So there are 22 Hebrew letters. Each of the letters is a character about where you are in this graduating astrological wheel. The first letter is the Aleph. Now, some say that is the fool, but what happens is today they've lost a lot of this information, not quite sure or understanding it. So they're just coming at you with dribble. Because when the Goths took over France and the children of Mary Magdalene and the knights and the true teachings and true initiations and rites, which were not a way of salvation, but a way to teach. Just like the tarot deck today is, which is probably why they made the tarot deck, because they knew that it was going into apostasy, that they were going to destroy them, infiltrate them, and they had to have some system that would be out there. Nobody wouldn't even know how to use them necessarily, but one day, because they like to play with them, one day they'd still be available, and it would be like hiding a treasure in plain sight. We have the tarot deck, we can use it just like you would astrology, but you don't need the tarot deck, but it is like a visual help and a teaching process to understand the destiny of the universe. When you say 78 cards in the tarot, what you're really talking about is the 72, like we talk about all the time. It has to do with not the deca or the 10 number system, but the major, real, true 3D system with 60 and 10s. And that incorporates the 12 or the 360 degrees, which has 72 deacons. And then the 22 letters. So what we're talking about is combining numbers and letters. Numbers is how we add things together and understand material, physical things. The letters are little pictures about us and our progress in time. It's the story. We're going to use the numbers to find out just the intensity of the story. Right? It's like kind of like chess. 2 up, 1 over, 3 diagonal, whatever. There's systems that you must go through. So the sexagesimal system is based on 60. And that's 3 trilateral triangles of 60 degrees, or 360 degree system. And that's 6, 6, 6, 3 trilateral triangles of 60 each. So that's the true system, the tarot. Now, the deca cards, it's not a deck of cards. What do you think? You throw your cards out onto the front porch and it becomes a deck and you walk on it? No, it's a deca, means 10. It's a system that you can prognosticate with by using the appointed dates and times of destiny without going deep and using the 22 paths of wisdom. So this knowledge was handed down by the Knights of St. John, but it was infiltrated by the Jesuits and they didn't understand it. So they tried to understand it and they began to write books and stuff, but they were really taken over by Judaism, which knows it as they know Torah in some kind of lucid, mixed up, false way. It's the apostasy. So today we're going to teach you not the apostasy, not astrology today in its apostate form that cannot really do much for you. Although there are some true prophets that are using it, not knowing it's not accurate, and they're using their telepathic communication to help you. And some of them are somewhat good at that. They have a lot of love and they're in tune. But the cards are only a sort of a guide or a utensil or tool that they're using. Basically, we got to use the spiritual mind. The major arcana was influenced by esoteric traditions that go back to Jesus Christ. And so you could probably say that 24 has something to do with it, right? The 24 elders. Now, you say, yeah, but there's only 22 letters. Well, there are vowels and so forth. Now, the vowels are usually 4, and this is the 4 court cards that you see. But we'll get into it deeper here. So they correspond to 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And ace through 10 is the minor archons. And the fool is Aleph. The magician is Beth or B. The high priestess, Gimel. The empress, Dalet. The emperor, Hey. The hierophant, Vav. The lovers, Zain. The chariot, Chet. Strength, Tet. The hermit, Yud. The wheel of fortune, Kaf. justice, Lamed, the hanged man, Mem, death, Nun, temperance, Samak, the devil, Ain, the tower, Pe, the star, Zadi, the moon, Kuf, the sun, Resh, judgment, Shin, and the world, Tav. So the minor archons, or arcana, A's through 10, that corresponds to the sephiroth, which are the 10 branches on the tree of life, the Sefer Yetzer. So the sephiroth has to do with the Sefer. And these are the 10 numbers. So Ace is the Kether or crown. It's kind of like the 7 chakras, but we've got 10. So we don't go 7 from the top to the tail bone, but we go 10 all the way down to the material kingdom. So it kind of shows you that when you're looking at these things, you can use different numbers when looking at different energies within the same system. So whether it's a 7 chakras or 10 sephiroth, they're still down your spine. The Kether or the crown. The number 2 is the chakma, which is the Hebrew word for wisdom. 3 is the Baina, which is understanding. 4 is the Chesed, mercy. 5 is the Gebura, severity. 6 is the Tifereth, beauty. 7 is the Nitzach, victory. 8 is the Hod, or the splendor. And 9 is the Yesod, or the foundation. And 10 is the Malkuth, or the kingdom. So when a person understands these things, that is the root of what a tarot deck is, that will add layers of meaning. When you have your tarot readings, you'll be able to understand what that card means, in not just more in depth, but you'll literally be able to understand what you're doing. If you don't know these things, you really can't use cards to get someone's destiny or understand anything about them. Because that's why, you see, people aren't really understanding the tarot deck. Somebody sits down, they got a tarot deck, they shuffle it a few times, cut it, and then they take the first card. And so it's chance, time and chance. And while that is an interesting way of going at it, it certainly is not the way it was intended. We are supposed to use the deck as a tool, as a guide to astrology. So you would need to know their birthday. And you would use their birthday to find out what card that you would start with in the deck. And the deck should be not shuffled randomly. So the Kaballah goes back through the truth. That's why it's got so much truth in it. But there is no Kaballah except tarot, or astrology, the sky. And that information's been lost. But the symbols are all still there. People knew that there was something to all of this, so they tried to figure it out. So all of the games that we have today, all of the games started off that they were played with cards or dice. Because remember, the Levitical system had 12 stones, and it had 2 other stones called the Urim and Thummim. Now, some say there might have been 2 Urim and 2 Thummim. 2 black stones and 2 white stones. The one the Lord gave me from the Nahuatl tribe, right here from where I live, not very far, at a altar that I found out here with the name of Yahweh written in paleographic Hebrew at the base of on the altar, and just down at the base of the mountain, a great stone the size of a big motorhome with the 10 Commandments written in paleographic Hebrew, dated to the time of Christ by the fact that there is astrological calendars next to it on the stone carved. And that's what you see with a lot of these petroglyphs, is a lot of astrological signs, and you see a lot of circles which has to do with astrology and knowing the time of the year for the festivals and so forth. And in some of them, out on the roadways, are guides telling you there's water ahead, or there's a temple, or which direction to go and stuff like this. But when the Jesuits came in and infiltrated the ancient wisdom, they didn't know it, and so they tried making it up. And over the years, people speculated, and these Rosicrucian groups and the modern Templars and Masons, they don't know. They're trying to surmise the truth. Like Aleister Crowley couldn't figure it out, so he made up his own satanic truth. And they brought Satan up from the bottomless pit, and Satan gave them answers that were twisted, hiding powerful truths, obscuring light and making darkness and causing evil in the world, telling John Dee and Edward Kelly to swap wives and be polygamous and, offer animal sacrifices to Yahweh and this kind of thing, which the Mormons later did under Brigham Young, killing the prophet Joseph Smith. And they did the same thing. It's not to enlighten the world, but to obscure the truth that these modern occultists aspire. So these words like arcana and archon and different words that go back to the same meanings have been purposefully kept in various different languages so that there's a piece of truth here and a piece there and a piece there. This is what Yahweh did at the Tower of Babel, or the Gate of El, which is the true deity. They were trying to become like the true deity, like Adam and Eve, who took of the knowledge of good and evil, that they might become like deity. Yahweh was infuriated, ran them out, wouldn't let them get to the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that's in the midst of the garden. Now, here's an interesting thing. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is in the garden in a circle surrounded by animals, beasts. And the tree of life is also in the center of a circle of animals called living creatures. And yet, in the Bible, many times it calls these two trees in the middle or in the midst of the garden singular. Why? If there are two different circles, one night and one day, you see 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. Because it doesn't go around and come back to the same place. It never does. It graduates. It's a figure eight. It's a spiral. So, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is in the center of the darkness. When the bottom side of the figure eight goes around, and when it gets to the top, it inverts and goes around again in a loop on the top. And in the midst of that one is the tree of life. But of course, that's the center of both circles, only now moved or transmigrated to the higher level. Think about what I'm saying there and you'll get it. The bottom side is just the inversion of the top side. It's the exact same circle inverted within and without. So these groups like the Rosicrucians, they kept popping up different areas, and the Templi Ordius of Aleister Crowley, and these dark, evil, satanic churches like Anton LaVey were in ignorance, had no clue, were communicating with Satan, and at some point knew it because they were Judeans and were following Yahweh, and they worshipped him. And he told them to genocide and hate, sacrifice the animals. All of this, it's all one evil plot. But that doesn't mean that this ancient wisdom isn't the truth. But it tells the Old Testament, or the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. It tells about the deity of this world in vengeance and the deity of love. And it gives us a choice. But most people today do not know there is a choice. They do not know that the 22 paths or ways of wisdom are a path to eternal life, and not to bondage, and not to this control by these astrological beasts. You're using the circle at the bottom of the wheel. You need to use the circle at the top of the wheel. So the 22 major arcana, which are the letters in the alphabet that go around the 24 houses, and we'll explain at some point why there's only 22. Remember, we do have vowels. They're associated with 22 paths of the tree of life, which is probably where they came up with DNA. There is no such thing as DNA in our cells. They can't see it with telescopes. They're imagining it. They're making it up just like they're making up the stars. But the reason they're set on it is because part of it's true in a symbolic sense because it's spiritual understanding. The physical body can be cut up into parts and scrutinized, but the spirit isn't physical and doesn't actually have houses and 12 this and that. It's simply energies, which is mind. So they're not completely understanding this, like people like Einstein and people, the scientists today. They're looking at this information that was given to them by Satan as if it's some kind of literal thing, that there's literal DNA, but it's not. The DNA is how we advance in a spiral, like a figure eight. And it's day and night, day and night, day and night. And there was an evening, and then there was a morning the first day. And an evening and a morning the seventh day. It goes to 7. And the 7th you rest and you start over the cycle. 10 has to do with the material, the fullness in space. Time has to do with 7s. So the 22 major arcanas are the 22 letters on the pathway around the astrological wheel, which is the tree of life. Each path represents a connection between 2 sephiroths. On the tree of life, you can draw 10 circles. So they're all linked to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The paths symbolize lessons, spiritual requirements, energies that you have to progress along and rise up the tree of life. We start from the kingdom of Malkuth, and we progress from one sephiroth to another. So what this means is that you are the fool, not essentially you. Essentially, you're the Christ. Now, Christ we would never say is the fool. The Christ child, the little baby that's going to play in the hole of the cobra, the serpent, the DNA. Well, the Christ child is playing in the hole. Where's the hole on the astrological wheel? Well, the serpent is Scorpio, which also has a big serpent in that astrological sign. It's sometimes called the serpent sign. In modern times, we call it the eagle. Why? Because on the top side, in the Lord's living creature circle, the eagle conquers the serpent. But remember, on the bad side, we have the lion, we have the bull. Remember, let's talk about it again. The lamb shall lie down with the wolf. The lamb is Aries and the wolf is Pisces. I mean, sometimes Pisces is understood as 2 fish and so forth, but the wolf lives in the latter end of the house of Pisces and is biting at the horse's heel, which is the white horse that you see in all the heraldry conquering the dragon. Remember, the dragon's in the sea, in the bottom half of the wheel, or the abyss, the 7-headed Tiamat, time and matter. And so the horse comes riding in with the sword of the spirit, which is truth, out of his mouth, which is light. And that's the kingdom of the day, and it conquers the kingdom of the night, and the great dragon is thrown down. And the lion will eat straw like the bull. Remember, the bull is Taurus, and the lion is Leo. Both of them are at the top of the wheel. The lion will eat straw like the bull, will be domesticated like a bull. Well, the bull represents strength, brute strength, power. Well, power without justice is just violence. Right now, we just have violence. We got to make the lion eat straw like the bull. We got to let the kingly royal justice, the judge, operate with the power that is domesticated and not brute and vicious. And the little child will play in the hole of the cobra or the serpent. So here we have the lion, which is Leo. We have the bull, which is Taurus. We have the serpent, which is Scorpio. And then the little child, which is the man, the son of man. Adam, second Adam, which is the Aquarian man. The Aquarian man is down at the bottom of the wheel, just as the scorpion and the serpent is down in the house of Scorpio and Aquarius. They're at the bottom, and the hole of the scorpion is at the winter solstice. And the little child will play in the hole, or the Aquarian man will begin to go forth and play from the hole of the serpent as it makes its way up the spiral, because it starts from the Virgo, the Virgin Mother, who gives birth to the child, the fool, who goes down through the serpent's coil as it ascends up around the spiral. Specifically, those four. But it also mentions the goat, which is down at the bottom of the wheel, Capricorn, and lamb, which is the Aries, and so forth. But those four it mentions specifically in a poetic form to explain to you the change that's going to occur with the lion, the bull, the serpent, and the man. They're going to be transformed. Now, the fool then is your lower carnal self. He's a fool, and he's going from one fortune to another. There are 4 seasons, and there are 4 suits in the deck of cards. So the fool is the joker, and he's like Jacob, the jack, and he's wrestling with Yahweh all night long during the darkness. When the sun comes up, he sees Ra'el coming over the hill, a ray of El coming over the hill. And immediately Yahweh says, "Oh, I'm done, you win," and lets him go. And the new day begins. Mary Magdalene sees Jesus raised from the dead at the dawn's early light. So the fool is going through this whole course. It's a metaphor for your spiritual evolution and your enlightenment. The path of the serpent, which symbolizes the seeker's journey to return to the divine, because remember, Yahweh cursed the serpent, and Jesus raised it up. He crucified that serpent, his flesh, upon the cross. The cross has 4 sides, or 2 cross beams, to make the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. So there are stages to your personal growth. And so therefore you develop and advance from glory unto glory. It's a spiritual path. So notice that today, as I said, because people don't understand this, they don't understand astrology. When they go and get their reading, you're being duped, because what that person usually is telling you when they're giving you your astrological interpretation is this is the devil and what he wants to do with you. He's going to give you this temptation of money. You're going to lose it. You're going to be tempted by love. You're going to blow it. You're going to be beaten. You're going to be trapped. You're going to be confused. This is what it is, around and around on the wheel of fortune, the lower wheel of fortune. And you throw your dice. So remember, there are 2 dice. Each dice has 6 sides. 6 and 6 is 12. There are 12 houses. So you usually have 2 dice to make 12, and you throw them on the wheel of fortune, or roulette. And so the Urim and Thummim were like 2 dice. It was no different. They each had 6 sides. And it had to do with astrology. And if you don't think this is Christian, just go to the New Testament and notice that the apostles threw lots to choose the apostle after Judas hung himself. So they were throwing lots to choose because it was going to be a divine choice. If they didn't need to seek guidance, they wouldn't have thrown lots. They would have just chose themselves. But they couldn't choose. They wanted a divine answer. So they threw lots. Well, today, when we vote, we're pretending that we're doing the same thing. We're casting a ballot, a ball lot. You see, we cast our lot, which is in the form of a dice or a ball or a pebble. We're casting our lot. But today it's time and chance, just like astrology. You know, you take the cards, you shuffle them, you cut the deck, you pull up the first card and you go, whoa, you know, there you go. Your fate. No. See, we shouldn't be voting. It's an theocracy. We should be receiving an answer from the Lord, from the lot, from the ephod, from the Urim and the Thummim, a yes or a no from the Lord. It has to do with astrology. We should be consulting the astrological calendar to see what's next and who will rule next. It isn't up to us. It's an appointed destiny. And regardless of what people think, when Trump or anyone else is elected, it is by divine election. I guarantee it. But with the Levitical priesthood, it was vengeance and judgment. And they were only getting answers from Yahweh, which was, usually answers of condemnation. How can we judge this person? How can we kill this person? Who can we genocide next? Right? Is he guilty or is he innocent? Because we hope he's guilty, but we want to kill him. It corresponds to modern astrology. Everything's been taken over. But in the true astrology, we're not trying to find out what the deity of vengeance wants to do to control us. He can only trick us anyway. He's called the trickster. And all of his little demonic, animal, bestial natures that are controlling you, they will control you if you let them, if you agree to it. But what we want to do is find out not what they're doing. We could care less. But what we want to do is, what is our destiny? Destiny is a different thing than fate. Fate is what must happen to you because you're being punished. Your fate awaits you, O prisoner. But your destiny awaits the princess and the prince, and have much fertility and be manners of a kingdom, and to have a garden that will produce 100-fold. So in true astrology, we find out when you were born, and we find that out by knowing where Jupiter is when you were born. Because Jupiter is, well, in the Sumerian they call it Nibiru. Nibiru comes and brings the soul into this incarnation. And so whatever house that Jupiter is in when you're born is the boat of Nibiru, or Jupiter, the Lord of the souls here, that brings that soul. And whatever that sign Jupiter is in when it's your sun sign, that's when your spiritual life begins in your journey. You get out of the boat, and that is Beth, the boat, the body. You are the soul, Aleph, or the El, or the light. And you go around the 12 houses in the boat. So you have to know your birth date to get an astrological reading. Now, astrology has this, but they don't seem to be using it in the tarot, not understanding that the tarot deck is a tool. You know how people do these astrological charts to get your reading? You don't need that. You can use tarot, and it's much easier because tarot is designed to remind you and guide you through the entire system. Because after all, astrology is based on 12s, and we talked about the 60 and the 72, the archons or the deacons and all of these things. It's all there in the tarot deck. You can use a deck of cards of the 10 system, but it's going to be limited because you don't have the 22 major archons. And so you're going to be limited in what you're going to be able to understand if you try to use playing cards. But that is a system, a limited system. But if you're truly going to learn tarot or astrology, you start with the day that you were born, and you don't shuffle the cards, but you have them in order. So from the day that you were born, you start with a deck of cards that is in order. If you count 30 cards and you're 30 years old, you see, then you land on the card that represents your life today. This is your destiny. Now, it may hold treasure if you're advanced, or it may, if you want to look at it the other way, be obstacles. The fool looks at it as an obstacle. And today, everyone is a fool. And so everyone is using it from the point of view of the lower religious system of the Judeans, the deity of vengeance. And they're only looking at these beasts rather than living creatures. They're only looking at it as fate rather than your destiny. Your destiny is what you choose. Your fate is what you receive. So there are lots of additional layers when you understand this to the meanings, and one needs to learn and completely grasp the meaning of each card and what it has to do with the stars as markers in your destiny. Because we all have to go through these natures. That's why they're lambs and lions and things like this. The bottom of the wheel, you see a lot of things like serpents, goats, and stubborn little things. And at the top of the wheel, we see things like lions and bulls that have great power. The Leo is the king in August. And that would be the limit and the height until you go into the next cycle. So it's kind of like the crown. In fact, right by lion, there's the star regal, which is the crown. And the queen is right there off to Leo's. If you're looking at Leo from outside and looking at the wheel in front of you, it would be to Leo's left by the crab or Cancer. That's the pinnacle, the top of the summit of Mount Ararat or Mount Zion or the Father's kingdom. But the prince brings the king's daughter home to the kingdom, which is the top of the wheel. So let's go through this. You're the fool in your blind, egotistical lower self that's journeying through this world. And so you're journeying through the tarot and you're spiritually evolving through this tree of life. You're partaking of the tree of life. That's what Genesis chapter 1 is talking about. It's not talking about our history as much as it's talking about your spiritual journey. And it represents both a descent into the material, into this physical realm, and also the ascending back to the divine, to your Father in heaven. So you have the 22 major arcana cards, which are, as we've said, corresponding to your 22 paths connecting the tree of life to the 10 sephiroth, or divine emanations. Each of these sephiroth represents some kind of migration or advancement, spiritual lesson, certain energies that you need, your progression between these spheres, because there's some spheres you don't go straight ascending and descending, but you do it in spheres or in spirals. So the fool begins at the crown, the Kether, that's the divine source, descends through all these paths, all the way down till it gets to the kingdom of this material world, in Hebrew called the Malkuth, or in Kaballah. And then again, it goes back and ascends in a cyclical journey. So the fool has a journey downward which mirrors creation. It goes from the Kether into the physical manifestation. It reflects the soul's incarnations into the material world. And the fool's got these garments. Remember what Yahweh said. Oh, you've partaken of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then their eyes were open and they understood that they were naked. They had understanding. This is the first thing you acquire, that you are naked. And so you receive a tunic, something to cover your private area. Originally, they tried to cover it on their own through their own works by just learning knowledge. They got a fig leaf from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was the fig tree. Jesus came and saw the fig tree and it didn't produce fruit, and he cursed it, because we want to go and eat from the tree of life. We don't want that to continually stand there by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We've got to ascend now, because it's not producing the fruit. We came down here to figure that out, to have understanding that we were naked. Once you find out that you're naked, you now have 10 more circles, which are tunics that cover you around about your body, as Adam stands with 2 arms out, 2 legs out, making a cross in the wheel of life. And that symbolizes the tree of life, or the sephiroth. So each of these milestones, you get another tunic or another covering, another house or another body. And there are these subtle bodies. You have an upward journey. You have spiritual awakening. Yes, you may not be completely awoke. No one in our world, which is the only world, will ever be fully awake until the end of the age of nirvana. Now, no one knows how much longer we have to go in the system of nirvana. But I would suggest that the system of nirvana is an endless system and doesn't really take any specific. I mean, it is a trillion, 1.5 trillion years, but it doesn't start here and end here. It's constantly going. It starts when you, the journeying one, begins your mission. There are many polywogs that are just now coming up out of the brine. They've already spent most of their time being minerals and chemicals. By the time they become a polywog, I suggest they're far more than halfway there. Where humans are today is probably closing in on nirvana. We certainly have gone most of the way through, because the last billion years is the day of Brahma, which I think we are now going into, which corresponds to this particular thing in the Bible called the millennium. Not that 1,000 years represents a billion, but that the 1,000 years is just one of the first pieces to the day of Brahman, which our Bible doesn't go into deeply. So each time you get a different cloak, or, in Dungeons and Dragons, you get a cloak, right? And then you're invisible to certain things. Well, once you get a certain covering, it protects you from certain things. It gives you glory. We're trying to get our white robes, which is the final robe, and the crown, which is the Kether. So you integrate these lessons every time you go along the path of the major arcana, and then you reunite with the divine. Now, this whole course is depicted as the serpent, winding and ascending the path. So people talk about raising the kundalini. Well, there's no actual thing that can be done to raise the kundalini in your body once and for all in this lifetime. It's simply more symbolic than anything else, because we're raising energies every day in every life and every year. And we advance. The serpent advances. And we advance it by playing the flute or the harp or some musical instrument, because the 10-string harp is a representation of the vibrations of the physical realm. We have to harmonize them in order to reunite and raise the serpent along the spiral path, the ascending path. It's a winding ascent. And each stop along the way is an ascent that requires some kind of mastery. So we become a master of that realm. Now, for example, you have the Aleph, which is the you that's going along. You get in the B, the Beth, the house, or the boat. You get to the magician, which corresponds to the path between Kether and Bina, or the crown and understanding. And then you're channeling the divine will down into understanding. And this continues on down to the kingdom of Malkuth, until you will begin to advance back up to the divine. So, in this wisdom, if you learn it, you'll find that there's much advantage in learning this true Kabbalah, not what they're teaching on the internet, not the scams. To learn this, I almost have to say you'd probably have to watch this video even to have a clue as to how to begin to learn this wisdom. They talk about the lightning flash. Well, obviously lightning or light is truth. And truth doesn't take time to go somewhere. It already is everywhere. It's a flash. It's the twinkle of an eye. And that's the divine energy flow. That's how it is. It's that fast. It's everywhere. It's all places. And it flows from the crown to the malkuth, from the top to the bottom. But the serpent path is much slower than that. And it's you, which they call the aspirant. And you are aspiring to go back to the light. Why would it take so much time to get back to the light and not very much time at all for the light to descend? Because the light descending in a flash means the light's always in the bottom, from top to bottom. But the awakening is what takes time, the understanding, to acquire the understanding in the conscious mind. The conscious mind itself takes it slow. But it has all the knowledge, and it winds up the path in an arduous ascent. And it navigates all 22 paths of the ways of wisdom. In this descent and ascent, there's a duality. In actuality, the dual is the whole, because two sides of a circle is just a whole. So while you are both the traveler, you're also the path itself. You are the thinker and the observer. If you can become aware of that wholeness, that oneness, that's the wedding. If you no longer think of yourself as simply the traveler, as though you have no say in where you're traveling and what you're doing, but you then become the path. You then become what you seek. Then the duality collapses in on the one. So the path between the Kether and the Chokmah, that duality, which is reflecting your cyclical upward journey, is really joy. It's adventure. It's what you are. Because you're not just the one having the journey, but you're the journey. But if you want to enjoy the journey, you've got to become oblivious to the fact that it isn't real. Like you're watching a movie, your scary movie, and you're having fun. It's scary, but you're forgetting that it's just a movie, but you're trying to enjoy it. So sometimes you want to forget that you're the creator in order to enjoy the path, to scare the bejesus out of you, so that you somehow that is a feeling that is euphoric. Now why? Because that euphoric means light. It's understanding. It's bringing that light down into the lowest crevices of the Malkuth. So if you understand this when you're reading tarot, you'll be able to understand the link between the cards and the person that they're coming to. So if you know their birth date, that's not random. That was destiny. You chose that day. It wasn't accidental that you just popped off of the divine into the creation. You made the choice to come down here on that day, an appointed time, knowing that your destiny or the end of your life would end over here at this point. And you can count the days. And he who hath wisdom can count the number of the beast, 66, which is 3 equilateral 60-degree triangles, which is the astrological wheel, which means that you can count the descent and the ascent, and you become one. It's just mapping your personal growth. It's becoming aware. Say, oh, okay, what day is today? Oh, it's Tuesday. I went on the calendar and I looked, it's Tuesday. What's the weather going to be like? Oh, well, there's sun's coming up early. Don't look like any clouds coming. It's just a way to understand in your conscious mind what reality always already had destined for you, what you already chose in your spiritual mind. You chose it. You're making the decisions. So you're not going to be afraid. Throw the dice, spin the wheel, and see what you get. And, oh, fortune or no, famine, no. You choose. You chose when you were born what your future was going to be. By coming into the world on a specific day, you chose your fortune. It's not accidental. You chose it. And you can find out become more aware of what you chose, what your destiny is, by simply consulting the cards or the stars, which is a clock or a calendar. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. We're over an hour. But I'm sure for a lot of you, this is very interesting, and we'll be talking more about this in the future. But this is something you're not going to find anywhere else. Please share it with those who you feel would be interested in this. Let's try to get the information to the world, to those who want it. And I wish you guys a good day. The Lord will bless you. His grace and His peace will be with you. And we will see you tomorrow. Have a good one, guys.